Chapter 5. The Tradition of the Surviving Toltecs. A Living Religion. The everyday life of the Wirarika is involved in every detail with their religious thought. Their religion is not an activity carried out separately, like those who go to church now and then, only to forget later everything relating to their supposed faith. For the Wirarika, religious thought does not consist of a doctrine or a body of beliefs. It is not registered in any kind of sacred book, nor is it administered exclusively by ministers or some authority. Religious authorities who are recognized by all or who exert some kind of dominion over the community do not exist. For them, religion is a way of life, in which each one of their acts is in relation to the forces governing the world. As they have no sacred books, organizations, or religious hierarchies, their share among all the responsibility to preserve and recreate their cosmogony, day after day, generation after generation. Thus, the histories, songs, and legends of Tamat's Kahulamari, or Tatewari, or the story of the creation of the world, are not a closed history. When the Marakame tells the stories, he is not simply repeating something memorized or learned from another sorcerer. Rather, he is relating what he has seen in that very moment of the ritual. To the many stories he has heard during his life concerning the personages of Wirarika cosmogony, he will add the stories that he himself sees or receives directly during those moments in which his awareness focuses on the separate reality. Among the Wirarika, the search for God or the spirit does not concern things that they tell you about and you believe. It is a matter of seeing and listening for yourself. A Wirarika child can listen for many years to the songs and legends of Grandfather Tale of the Deer, or of Tate Urianaka, but until he or she sees them personally, he or she will not be truly initiated into such knowledge. As members of the modern culture, we too often think that the religious thought of the Indians is populated with superstitions and imaginary tales. This is due to the fact that our modern meaning of religion is exactly that: a body of dogmas we really do not believe, a body of standards of conduct we do not respect, a series of stories we never witnessed, empty stories and superstitions, without any concrete empirical reference. We can speak of Christ or of God interminably. We can even declare that God wants this or that he thinks in such and such a manner, that he behaves thus and so. But we never see him, nor does he make anything clear that we can affirm. It is natural that starting from such an empty and poor religious base, we would think that something similar would occur among the Indians. If we don't go even further to speak with petulance of the primitive religions and pretend to place ourselves far above them. We make studies and we classify. We make opinions and we believe we understand. The truth is, generally, we have not the slightest idea of what really occurs in the religious experience of the Indians, especially those who preserve the fundamental aspects of the ancient pre-Hispanic religions. In this sense, the Wirarika are an extraordinary case. Their religion has been preserved practically intact, free from the contamination of the barbaric religions that arrived from Europe starting in the 16th century, and also those that in more recent times have penetrated our country from the United States. The word religion among them retains its full significance. Relejare is to reunite, a return to unite humans with the energy that animates the world. which we would call God, Nahual, spirit, intent, Isusi, or whatever occurs to us. The word Isusi, with which the Wirarika designate the ultimate energy that sustains everything existing. Precisely because the religious practices and procedures continue to operate among them as an efficient and functional system, allowing the men and women of this people to reunite themselves effectively with the spirit, we can say it is a living religion. It is a true path of return, involving complex and unusual handling of perception and awareness. Thus, what the Marakame relates in his songs are not stories he learned at one point in his life, later to be repeated to the rest. Rather, he attains a world or a series of parallel worlds into which he effectively penetrates, at times together with all those present, thanks to the handling of forms of attention the average person does not even suspect exists. The Marakame. Marahakame in the Wirarika language. Although practically all of the Wirarika participate in the religious life of their communities, there stands out in this sense the figure of the Marahakame. Marakame. They pronounce it Mara-ahakame. Mara-ahakame, who according to anthropologists is the shaman of the community. The term shaman really doesn't tell us much, since it is used to designate, with one pinstroke, all healers, sorcerers, huichol singers, priests, herbalists, dancers, diableros, a practitioner of black sorcery, witches, and everything having to do with them. Knowing there exist peculiarities relative to each one of such practitioners. The term has been abused so much that now a person can be transformed into a shaman through courses lasting a week or so. These are nothing more than refried versions of mind control. There exist many books on the market about the famous Silva mind control, invented by a Dr. Silva in the United States in the late 70s. Sometimes embellished with indigenous music and even with mind-altering drugs. This kind of imaginary shamanism is especially fashionable in Europe and particularly in Spain. The case of the Marahakames should therefore be considered apart from the term shamanism. The Marahakame is fundamentally the ritual Wirarika singer, who in his singing transmits the signs for the grandfather fire, and refers to the stories of the creation of the world and of the hundreds of personages who populate the Wirarika cosmogonic universe. He must be present in practically all ceremonious or religious events. The same is true in dealing with propitiating rainfall, or in asking advice about solutions to everyday problems, or in curing a sick person. On such occasions, the Marahakame enters into a trance and receives instructions directly from the powers that govern the world. Singing for one or several nights straight, he relates the designs of the powers or the unseen reasons that give rise to some illness or the prolongation of a drought. This is the most simplistic view of what a Marahakame does. Before I go deeper and refer to more complex tasks of the Marahakame, it is worth mentioning that there are a great many of them in the mountains. Every small settlement can have one or more. Furthermore, there are no specific requirements to fulfill. nor does it require any authorization except that of the spirit. There are also women marahakames, although they are very few in number, probably due to the demands of gestation and the raising of children. While it is true that marahakames in general are self-taught, without instructions, special education, or some teacher who initiates them, we shouldn't therefore think the task is easy or learned quickly. Almost all marahakames are very old. The task they carry out embodies an astounding degree of complexity in the external, where the number of elements and ritual objects they must handle is impressive, as well as in the internal, where the handling of their attention and perception must be intense enough to pull all of those present in the ritual to that other world into which they have entered. Although I have spent years in direct contact with their rituals, observing and experiencing in my body and my perception the work of the marahakame, my conviction grows each time when I realize that what I manage to perceive is but a small part of everything going on. The rituals are extraordinarily rich and complex. Everything they do, lighting the fire, dancing, their way of walking, singing, the manner and order in which they seat themselves, their attire, the necessary articles, the work of the ritual singers, the response from the rest, the entrance and exit to the magic circle, the way they approach or address the fire, always has a necessary form, a direction, a rhythm, and specific order. Our simplistic image of the ritual, in which the Indians basically dance, sing, and observe the fire, has little to do with reality. Much more occurs, a great deal more. So much goes on that there are rituals that last for days or weeks without repeating the procedures of the day before. It is incredible that all the participants perform with concentration and surprising precision, with exact knowledge of how to behave in each moment. As a result, they act as a single body, with complete synchronization, without the intervention of verbal agreements. Curiously, I've never seen a Wirarika assume the role of master and verbally instruct the others. The apprenticeship of the spirit. At the beginning, I asked myself, how did they learn all this? How is it that no one requires instructions? Silent observation gave me the first part of the answer. They learn since infancy, even from the mother's womb. Maternity and lactation do not exclude women or children from the rituals. Not even during the grueling trip to human Kuluabai. So, for literally their entire lives, the Wirarika participate in the rituals. They learn, participating without any kind of previous training. It was among them that I became acquainted with this form of apprenticeship, and I continue to regard it as the best, since it doesn't waste time and energy seeking the authorization of reason, the ego, and personal history. Rather, you are simply placed there, where the situation forces you to act. The second answer, how they move with such precision and synchronization during the rituals, has to do with those concrete links that human awareness is capable of, especially in situations involving high concentration, where attention and energy are focused toward a common objective. The result is some type of alignment encompassing the awareness of the participants, and it establishes a form of communication much more subtle and efficient than the ordinary communication of words. The absolute fact is that they are transformed into a single energetic body, which naturally acts in harmonic unity with itself. Returning to the knowledge of the Marahakame, although for his entire life he has participated in rituals and observed many Marahakames, the substantial part of his knowledge is not learned by imitation. Rather, he receives directly from the spirit, who to them appears as the blue deer. In fact, it is he who has given these people the task of transforming themselves into Marahakames. It is not a personal decision. Having received the call, they must make many changes, since the way to prepare and to fulfill the lessons of Tamatsin is by living an orderly and demanding life, with long periods of abstinence of various kinds, incessant participation in the rituals, and concomitant activities. Learning to focus the dreaming experience in the spiritual apprenticeship, and above all, making the pilgrimage to Human Kuluabai, the home of Tamat's Kahula Mari. It is there, in that fundamental zone of power, where the Marahakames and those who are on their way to becoming one go to search for their deer, the fundamental vision or visions upon which they will construct their task. Don Pedro de Haro, the famous Marahakame, quoted some 25 years ago by Fernando Benitez, told me that in the cosmogony they experience in concrete form, there is not in reality only one deer, but many, including the false deer, who tempts you, dangerously offering power and knowledge, while in actuality it loses you, leading you astray. He also explained to me that in the apprenticeship of the Marahakame, there are 5 principal deer, which are met one by one, beginning with the smallest and finishing with the discovery of the largest deer, Tamat's Kahulamari. Each deer has its own characteristics, and its lessons are relative to the nature of its knowledge, focusing on different aspects of life and awareness. It is there where they receive the principal parts of their instruction. For this reason, unlike the common Wirarika who are obligated to make the pilgrimage to Human Kuluabai at least once in their lives, the future Marahakames, or those already existing as such, have to go many times. The Marahakames are as poor as any other Wirarika, receive no pay for their services, and in addition to their spiritual work, must continue to carry out everyday tasks such as tilling, seeding, and harvesting of their fields, the care of animals, the construction and repair of their dwellings. The reason motivating the Wirarika to want to transform themselves into Marahakames surely is nothing else but true spiritual conviction. A friend of mine commented that after one of his public presentations in Spain, Carlos Castaneda declared that compared to the members of European modern culture, all Indians are sorcerers. In the case of the Wirarika, this is particularly true, given that almost all of them are expert practitioners of the complex spiritual practices in which they participate from birth, and are therefore capable of handling themselves with efficiency in the everyday world, as well as in the separate reality that makes up the world of the Nahual. Among the Wirarika, There are many Marahakames, some better than others, not from a moral point of view, but rather from an energetic one. Some Marahakames are somewhat addicted to drinking, and some have health or survival situations that do not exactly express a high level of energy. It is not a question of judging them, because foregoing considerations aside, all of them lend a valuable and disinterested service to the community. The thing to be aware of is that among the Wirarika themselves, the levels of knowledge and practice in the spheres of awareness and perception, as well as in the sphere of daily affairs, vary a great deal from person to person. I have known about 15 Marahakames. Among these, I have had a close relationship with 4, and I can say that some of them are involved in matters so extraordinary and fascinating that they need add nothing from the stories of Castaneda, which is no overstatement. These Marahakames and the more or less secret groups they lead carry a tremendous responsibility. They must preserve intact, for the generations to come, the body of practices and knowledge dealing with the unsuspected possibilities of awareness and perception, which the indigenous world developed over the centuries and millenniums. That knowledge continues alive and developing, even expanding. As is becoming more apparent, some ramifications of this knowledge are beginning to project themselves outside the Indian world and to touch various receptive spirits. We don't know how far it will go. Invisible villages. The Wirarika live in the most remote and inaccessible regions of the mountains, including the states of Nayarit, Jalisco, and Zacatecas. They live in towns that in fact do not exist. I mean by this that if you manage to vanquish all difficulties in order to go to these places, where there exist neither highways, nor dirt roads, nor lights, nor telephone, nor television, nor radio, and the only way to get there is by walking for many hours, sometimes days, without losing your way too much. When finally you arrive at the village of San, you find there is no village. And where is San? You will ask, if you have the luck to encounter someone, why? It's right there in front of you. Don't you see it? Well, no. The Wirarika do not live grouped together in the place where the center of the community supposedly is. A center generally composed of a ceremonial temple, Kalihue, and a structure for the meeting of the traditional authorities, plus a few shacks. Rather, they live distributed among the ravines and glens of the region. And where is such and such? A fellow's house. Just over there, across the river. Very good, many thanks. And then it turns out that the just over there takes several hours. Time and distance pass by in another dimension for the Wirarika. The fact is that each family usually lives quite removed from the others, and they only get together during fiestas. It is then that the religious ceremonies bring them out of their little huts, and the villages are filled with people. Inaccessibility. In the Wirarika communities, there live only the Wirarika. Entry permits for non-Wirarikas are granted by the local authorities infrequently, generally for representatives of the state government or for representatives of the INI, Indigenous National Institute. If outsiders manage to arrive there and commit the discourtesy of entering the communities without prior consent, they are placed in a jail called the stocks. Inside, their feet are secured between two enormous planks of wood with two holes in the middle, so they cannot escape. The time spent in the stocks depends on the mood of the sheriffs and the fine they will charge the intruders. There have been cases of foreigners held there after being informed they will be used as human sacrifices in the upcoming fiestas. With such jesting, the intruders are ready to leave a fair-sized, voluntary donation to the community in exchange for their freedom. The fiestas. The religious calendar of the Wirarica is very full, made up of numerous activities that they simply call fiestas. Neira. The fiesta of Peyote, Hikuri Neira. The fiesta of tender corn, Tate Niera. Of the drum, Tepo. And the series of ceremonies having to do with the pilgrimage to Human Kuluabai, to name just a few. Of all of them, the most important is the pilgrimage, which closes the religious calendar of one year and opens the next. The pilgrimage to Human Kuluabai is carried out year after year. Each community counts on a group responsible for making the trip over the sacred route. The group, which goes by the name Jicareros, also known as Payoteros. They are responsible for organizing the ceremonial activities for the entire year. And during the pilgrimage, they carry out the hunt for deer peyote, gathering large quantities of the sacred cactus, which will be used by the entire community during the months preceding the next pilgrimage. Hikuri. Peyote, or hikuri, is a fundamental part of the life of the Wirarica. Practically everyone consumes it from childhood, always in a ritual manner. It is very rare and bad manners when someone becomes drunk or misbehaves with peyote. In general, they take very small quantities of it, save on very special occasions when it is appropriate to consume large quantities. Existing studies relevant to the subject and my own observations affirm that there exists no kind of physical or mental damage to the Wirarica due to the use of peyote. On the contrary, they are very sensible, peaceful, and profound people in their thinking as well as in their way of life. The return to the pilgrimage, it is in reality made up of several stages, beginning with the preparation ceremonies, which are carried out in the mountains in each community. Afterward follows a trip of more than 400 kilometers to the region where the divine luminous Tamats Kahula Mari was born, in the desert of San Luis. At different places during the trip, rituals of a high religious significance are carried out, which means the pilgrims take several days to arrive at Human Kuluabai. Since the early 1970s, portions of the route have been traversed by bus whenever possible, be it independent transport or in vehicles furnished by the INI. If those are not available, they go on foot for the entire way, making the pilgrimage last about 40 days. Usually they take from 7 to 10 days between leaving and returning to the mountains, where they continue the rituals. Once at Human Kuluabai, they carry out the hunt for hikuri and related rituals. Later they return to the mountains and hunt the deer, which in this case is not deer peyote, but rather real deer. This takes another 3 to 5 days. When the hunt is over, they return to the mountains and prepare themselves for the peyote ceremonies, which takes about another week more. In total, they take about 1 month to celebrate the rituals having to do with the trip to Ginnunga-Greg. Even though every Wirarika supposedly should make the pilgrimage to the Ginnunga-Greg at least one time in his life, some go more, and others, who are the exception, never go. The reason they should go at least once is that there, in a direct encounter with Tamatsin, Iusi, or Tatewari, as fortune would have it, the pilgrim will be able to find the answers to the essential questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? What is my task in this life? In particular, it is the answer to this last question that determines whether Wirarika dedicate themselves to the fields, to business, to healing, to ritual singing, to the playing or fabrication of musical instruments, or to any kind of undertaking to change their lives. There have been Wirarika who find themselves in countries far removed from the scene, such as Cuba or in Europe, precisely because in Ginnunga-Greg they received the message to travel there. This is why the Wirarika are great travelers, or to put it colloquially, very wayward. In effect, those who wish to go far in knowledge must realize part of their apprenticeship outside their world of origin, to which they almost always return. Those who go on pilgrimage more often are motivated by some special urgency, such as to solicit favors from the powers that govern the world, to resolve very serious problems, or to give thanks for these same favors. Also, or decisions they are not sure how to resolve. In any case, those who go most often to Ginnunga-Greg are those preparing to be marahakames, or functioning as such, as I mentioned before. There is also a group of pilgrims who deserve separate consideration, the jicareros. The jicareros are a closed group of Wirarika who, during a period of 5 years, had the enormous responsibility of organizing all the religious activities of the community. These include carrying out the yearly pilgrimage to the desert of Ginnunga-Greg and other sacred sites. Each community has its own group of jicareros who organize and carry out their activities independently, although in general they coincide in the dates and types of ceremonies. The group numbers more than 15 and less than 30 members in addition to the marahakame, who is their natural leader. As in each community, there are many marahakames. Jicareros look to the most powerful to carry out their task. There are many duties which they maintain during their entire stay in the group. Thus, there is the urukuakame, he who leads the way during journeys and he who indicates the way to follow. Many times this duty is filled by the oldest man. Every one of these duties is related to one of the sacred entities, so that apart from his normal name, each one will adopt that of one of the original powers who form the world and determine the function of everything. Tateware, Tayau, the grandfather fire, Kahulamari, In the beginning of time, Kahulamari, the possessor of the Book of Knowledge, transformed himself into a deer and offered himself to be hunted in the ritual hunt, which gave rise to the sacred hunt of the deer the Wirarika carry out as part of the pilgrimage to human Kuluabe. And Urianaka, earth. The one who marches always ahead of the Marahakame, walking in front of him on journeys, and the person in charge of taking care of the power objects that the ritual singer will utilize in the ceremonies is called Nauratame. Each name has its significance and its history, also its specific corresponding activities within the ritual activities of the group. After 5 years, the jicareros will hand over the responsibility to the new jicareros, who will be responsible for the next cycle. The majority of the new jicareros fulfill their duties of their own will, though some are assigned as an obligation. For the majority, to belong to the select group is a privileged opportunity to live much closer to the spirit. Some of them, upon completing their 5-year cycle, join the new group of jicareros or continue working very close to their Marahakame, who is also relieved every 5 years. Even those who have been chosen by force in a short time find a spiritual family among their companions with whom they end up feeling very close. Inside the Wirarika community, the jicareros are a separate group due to the fact that they live full-time concerned with matters of the spirit. Their meeting center is the ceremonial kalehue, called tukipa in their own tongue, where there must always be a fire burning, since Tateware is the principal deity, and he is considered the first and most ancient of the powers, predating even the great-grandfather tale of the deer. The jicareros travel a lot because the sacred territory of the Wirarika is very large, including not only the desert of San Luis Potosi, Human Kuluabai, but also the sacred places in the state of Durango, Hawara Manaka, Lake Chapala, Rapavillayame, the ocean of Nayarit, Tate Aramara, a Lady of the Waters, Tate Matineri, who also dwells in a spring in the San Luis Desert, and the famous Teotihuacan as well, the cradle of Toltequity. They must bring offerings every year to all these sites and celebrate the corresponding rituals in each. None of this excuses them from the multiple responsibilities of everyday survival, such as planting and harvesting. They receive no salary. On the contrary, all these journeys, their preparations, and the elements involved in the ritual run up costs that the jicareros pay out of their own pockets, often empty like those of the rest of the Wirarika. Of all the jicareros, the one who works most and travels most is the Marahakame. While the jicareros can share the multiple errands among themselves, and on some occasions, not all of them make the trip to the sacred sites, the Marahakame must be present at all times, since without him, the rituals could not be carried out. The name jicareros appears to have come from a time long ago. I have considered a possible relation between this name and the fact that they collect peyote, that is, hikuri, or hikuli. In the writings of Lumholtz at the end of the last century, He calls them jiculeros, which looks like jicareros, although he evidently did not enter into their activities, since he does not contribute anything in that respect. This possible relation is supported by the fact that in the present day they also are commonly called payoteros, the former notwithstanding. This was the answer I received when I asked my tiocaris, brothers' companions, jicareros, the meaning of their name. Hey, Taya, why do you call yourselves jicareros? That comes from a long time ago. Look, we are a group. We are called jicareros because we keep the tradition, not only out of preference, but out of obligation, so it won't be lost, because the day the custom ends, the tradition, then we Wirarika are likewise finished, as if they had given us poison. So, since we keep the tradition, then altogether we are that, the jicara of God. Jicara is a kind of bowl used in indigenous towns of Mexico for keeping food or for keeping ritual objects. In that cup are kept knowledge and the most important customs of our great-great-grandfathers. It never ceases to be interesting, this relation between the name jicarero and the word jicara, which is a Nahuatl word. The word has as roots Zikli, navel, and Kali, house, implying the house or the enclosure of the navel, which in pre-Hispanic cosmogony has a sacred significance. The navel was the center, the point of contact with the cosmos. Thus they spoke of the navel of the world, or the navel of the moon, Mexico. And the physical and celestial geography of the pre-Hispanic world was full of Xictlictlis, navels. Therefore, a jicara was not just any receptacle, but rather a container used only to keep sacred things in. In that regard, I recommend consulting the works of Guthrie Tibon, Historia del Nombre y Fundación de la Ciudad de México, and El Ombligo como Centro Cósmico, published by the Fondo de Cultura Económico, Mexico. Before beginning my tale about the pilgrimage to Human Culuabay, I must comment about the community in whose group of jicareros I have been participating and with whom I made the pilgrimage. Santa Maria, a fictitious name to protect the privacy of the community and to avoid their being disturbed, is a Wirarika community hemmed in by the most inaccessible parts of the mountains, a zone of deep gorges and high mountains, which receives, on very rare occasions, visitors from the outside. If the Wirarika communities have kept themselves isolated by their geography and their customs, Santa Maria is the best example of both, since it is physically the most inaccessible and the restrictions having to do with the entry of outsiders are tough. In this, it is distinguished from the other communities in which the presence of visitors is not so unusual. For matters having to do with the commerce of artisans, or for being accessible from the dirt roads coming from Zacatecas, as occurs, for example, in San Andres Cojamiata. It is in Santa Maria where the preservation of the traditions has been kept most orthodox and almost without contamination. But the special significance of Santa Maria is due not only to its location. In some way, It is the center of the Wirarika spiritual universe, since it was there that Tatewari was supposedly born. The equivalent of saying that is the center of their cosmogony. This is made manifest by the fact that the Wirarika of other communities, on occasion, undertake a journey to Santa Maria, which then itself becomes a destination for spiritual pilgrims to make an offering or to seek approval or advice from one of the powers of the world. It was in this community, center of history and cosmogony of the Wirarika people, where I encountered the clearest and most powerful expression of the surviving Toltequity, the magic universe of the Wirarika. Part 3. Experiences in the Toltecs world. Chapter 6. Anti-Anthropology in Action. What follows are examples of fieldwork relating to some of my experiences among the Wirarika. See the color insert for some photos of these experiences. I will not attempt to relate a complete history of my 15-year relationship with that world, but just simply reveal some typical moments of my experience among them that are congruent with the objective of the present work. My intentions are not academic, or to make a comprehensive study, or even to portray a likeness of Wirarika culture. This is only a personal testimony that will show some of the features of their unusual way of being and living, and the anti-anthropological way in which I have approached them. During the period of my first contact with the Wirarika, I was actually studying anthropology, but at that time, it was already quite clear to me that academic anthropology and its theoretical frameworks had little to offer in the search for my spirit. From the time of my experiences with the Nahuas, I began to incorporate the traits of anti-anthropology, which would characterize all my doings among the Indians. My encounter with the Wirarika was, from the beginning, motivated by my own internal restlessness. I did not go to study them or to gather folkloric or exotic experiences, but in search of suitable channels for my urgencies of internal growth. I wanted to learn, and above all, experience for myself and in myself those other forms of knowledge ignored by modern people, which indigenous peoples such as these have jealously preserved through the centuries and millennia. Diverse works and studies about the Wirarika, with different levels of depth and accomplishment, have presented to the Western world the principal traits of their culture. The majority of these studies represent very respectable efforts, considering everything the investigators had to do to carry them out. They invested much time and work to arrive at very inaccessible places, to obtain informants, to do interviews and recordings, to find translators, and then to write their reports. The works of Lumholtz at the end of the 19th century are amazing for the degree of openness and curiosity they reflect on the part of the investigator. They were written during an era in which the ontological inferiority of the Indians was regarded as obvious, therefore not even discussed. Also, investigators such as First, Zing, and Benitez contributed their efforts at knowing the Wirarika way of life and thought. In spite of the seriousness of such work, the majority of investigators who approach the indigenous universe have been, with the best of intentions, external observers, not participants in the world they wanted to know. Such external observation is not considered negative by academics. They share the belief of all rationalist Western culture that it is not necessary to experience something in order to know it. It is enough to observe, rationalize, register, and classify it. In the case of ethnologists, there is also an entire series of theoretical frameworks which supposedly aids them in understanding the reality of the ethnologized. They start from the basis that there is only one reality and that the point of view of Western science is the most correct one possible. Such a supposition discards the possibility that there are aspects of reality that cannot be detected by simple external and rationalist observation. One of the most common failings of the anthropologist is the same as that of modern people in general. We believe that what we perceive is the totality of what is occurring in the scene we are observing. Thus, when witnessing a ritual, we observe indigenous people in a sitting position with their heads between their knees. We could say, after the dances, the members of the group appeared very tired and they sat down to rest, without noticing that those people, far from finding themselves tired, might be engaged in very intense work on a level of reality that we do not even suspect. In our arrogance, we accept as a fact that what we do not see simply does not exist. Anthropologists formulate their explanations, discourses, and theories, basing them on what they saw and how they interpreted it, regarding it as a fact that things are exactly thus. However, they do not take into account what they overlooked. The Indian informants respond only to the questions asked, and Westerners generally do not know how to pose the proper questions relating to the fundamental points of the cosmovision they seek to understand. As a result, the conversation will revolve around those points they believe to be important, rather than necessarily touching upon the real fundamental aspects of the indigenous universe. To complicate the situation even more, many Indians, particularly those most deeply involved in spiritual matters, are experts in telling nosy foreigners exactly what they want to hear, knowing they'll be rid of the outsiders that much sooner. So, in spite of great and sincere efforts, the works and reports about the indigenous universe by expert anthropologists are basically disconnected from the internal happenings of that universe, although they have never realized it. They were there. They asked all the questions. They saw it with their own eyes. But they were never aware of what was really going on. They never found out that they were not aware. Interpretations from the point of view of Western thought cannot show us more than reflections of the very same Western thought projected toward the exterior and then taken as reality. Investigators who do not participate with the totality of their being, who do not transform themselves into the other, cannot perceive the otherness passing in front of their eyes. They only look at themselves and their own world, without realizing that through their interpretations and their observation disconnected from the other, they are inventing a world that does not attain the characteristics of the indigenous universe, but rather their own universe, the universe of modern Western culture. For them to penetrate into the perception of that other world, they have to detach themselves from their own ego, from their own history, from their own name, in order to change and merge themselves in the encounter with the others. Only in this way can they free themselves from the mirror that traps their perception, that normally reflects their ideas about the world, always taken as the only reality. The difficulty for investigators in overcoming the barrier of perception is that they find themselves trapped in a very particular way of perceiving that has as its permanent reference the description of the world they learned from other members of their society, starting at a very early age. This apprenticeship assumes the role of constructing by itself that learned description, which they take as the only reality, while at the same time remaining unaware that this description is projecting that reality from inside themselves onto the beings and things making up the external world. In this sense, a sorcerer, accustomed to conceiving the world as a space in which there coexist multiple realities, has the advantage. Thus, the Indians who allude to aspects of reality that violate the logic of the everyday world have not lost their judgment, nor are they ignorant or superstitious. Rather, they have learned by experience that to different realities also belongs different logic. A man of knowledge, or a sorcerer, can even be an expert in the movement and eventual integration of both worlds. The foundation of my work over the years among indigenous peoples, as well as encounter groups I have coordinated, has been the insistence on learning to jump time and time again and in multiple mediums through the barrier of perception. We learn to penetrate the separate reality, which opens itself to our experience when we can detach ourselves from the reflection of ourselves and our world of personal history and self-importance. Because I have been able to make those jumps, I can affirm the existence of the other world. Its perception reveals to us the hidden nature of the indigenous world and of the world in general, which embraces at once the everyday and the extraordinary. Penetrating into the separate reality places before us both the amazing phenomena that can take place during the experience of a magic ritual or ceremony among the Indians, and those much more enriching alternative realities underlying our interpersonal relationships in our intimate world or in our field of work. Thus, it is that our everyday world also contains its own separate reality, its own parallel worlds, although we do not suspect it. Free from the neurotic fantasies that insist on looking for absolute truths, I aspire only to present a simple testimony of what occurred in that indigenous world, of what I saw and what I did among these people whose time and history we still have the privilege to share. Right now, as I write this, they are alive, on the same planet as ourselves, in this same instant, carrying out their ceremonies and rituals to contact the spirit. The same way and with the same objectives as their ancestors, the ancient Toltecs, practiced millennia ago. From all my work with the indigenous peoples of Toltec descent, I am taking, as examples, 3 experiences that can be regarded as 3 moments of my integration with their world and of my development as a human being. These moments represent neither the beginning nor the end of my work among them. The first is an initial approximation that portends some intuitively anti-anthropological features. The second is a moment of transition in which my intention of penetrating into the magic world of the Indian is clear and expresses itself through actions and continuing tasks. It is like knocking on an invisible door using the force of my axe. The third is the moment in which the door opens, and finally, I achieve a perception in common with those beings who make up the mysterious world, for which I had searched so long, and which so long eluded me. Of the 3 excerpts, the first comes from my time as a student of anthropology. Therefore, the style is more formal and less natural than in the 2 following, there being almost 10 years intervening between it and the following stages. I included it because it serves to illustrate the very different way I saw things as I transformed my attitude into an approximation of the others. These are 3 passages about my adventures in the peculiar world of the best representatives of surviving Toltequity, the Wirarika.